So yeah, I'm excited. Welcome guys to this episode. We have my dear friend Aram and business partner, and we are really going to get into the nitty gritty today on talking about production. This is one of those things that for me, and I'm sure for many of you who are listening to this episode, don't know anything about, and I didn't know anything about this in the very beginning. For me, in my experience coming into this industry, I was coming from a completely different market. I was in the entertainment industry, and like many people, had a passion for juicing, passion for health, and that was really what was driving me. I tend to think of myself in general as like an organized person, generally speaking, but I did not have any semblance of understanding of what it meant to run a restaurant, run a food service business, and from a very, very grounded place of understanding really what I'm getting into is food manufacturing. And so I often say that on this channel. It's like when you're in food service, you're in the manufacturing business. And the reason I frame it that way is because manufacturing is not emotional. It's just all process, right? To really be good at manufacturing, you have to be very efficient and effective in your process of doing everything. And so that was kind of a rude awakening, I would say, in my experience. And I think it is for a lot of people. And what I see, and you can probably attest to this, and I'd be curious on your experience and journey, but I find that a lot of people, because that aspect is so unfamiliar, that people revert to either just guessing or having certain pars when it comes to their production and output for their juices, and just saying, well, hey, we made 10 last time, even though I don't know if I need 10 juices and like my, tropical breeze juice, like I'm going to just make another 10. And that's what we did that last time. And that's the easiest way for me to do the math on what I need, because it's so complicated to do all these conversions and all this stuff. And so in essence, this episode is going to be all about probably common pitfalls that people run into, what the implications of those things are, and a solution that's going to change the game that Aram and I have actually been working on that we're really excited to share with you guys. That's going to make this whole problem and whole issue a lot better. So before we go too deep, because I can find myself already going down that rabbit hole, Aram, do you want to just give the people in the community a little bit of introduction as to kind of what you've been doing, what your history in this industry is, and some of your experience around why you've also oriented yourself towards solving this problem?
Hi, everyone. So I think of myself as an accidental food entrepreneur, because I had no intention in the beginning of getting into this industry. And I think, like probably many people, you find yourself in a situation where something is starting kind of small. Maybe somebody, in my case, my sister, kind of started getting into this, and she was very much into the vegan movement and kind of health and wellness. And she just started this very kind of small scale operation that I could see was starting to catch fire. And I joined her, and we started working together, and I started helping her in figuring out, okay, how do you take this little thing that she was doing that works in a very small scale, and how do you actually start to expand that and scale that? And that's where very quickly you start to hit the wall with things that worked in the small scale just stop to work once you start getting to any quantity where you can't really jump in and scramble anymore, right? So I think there's this threshold where you can just get it done, you can just make it happen. And when you hit that limit, that, I think what I've seen in a lot of cases is that becomes the thing that repeats day after day, where somebody's in this mode of stress and they're not able to really work on the business, because they just, by the time they, rest their head on the pillow that night, they have to get up and kind of repeat that process of scrambling. And even though I think a lot of us intuitively felt like there's got to be a better way to running our production, running our operation, there was simply no time to sit and plan it. So I think, luckily, my background before this, I've been in several different businesses over the decades, and software was one of them. So I have software background, web development, front end, back end. And my first thought was, where are the systems for the small scale producer, right? For the large producers, you have systems, you have these large scale enterprise ERP systems that try to optimize and plan some of this stuff. But I think for the small scale operation, it tends to be unapproachable for a variety of reasons that we've spoken about over the years. And I think the tricky thing is, if you don't have those systems in place, you're perpetually in this mode of being stuck. There's lack of consistency, quality control. I think the team gets frustrated when you don't have a system in place that you can start to breathe and improve. So I think for all these reasons, it's and we'll dive in more, but into kind of what some of these solutions are. But that's a little bit about kind of my background. But yeah, I'm curious, kind of what your I know we've talked so much about this, but like, when were those moments where you started to feel this is out of hand in producing?
Day one. I think the moment I really remember. It's really funny. Like, cause you got to imagine me. I'd never worked in a cafe. I've only watched and observed as an outsider. So I'm like, yeah, I make stuff at home. How hard could this be? Right. This is the way my mind is working. And I remember spending all this time creating my menu, right? Like probably maybe a few months, right? Creating my menu, and then going out with our food truck, and then somebody putting in an order for like a few different things categorically, and then just going, oh my God, I don't even know how to produce this. Like, I don't know how long these people waited. It was awkwardly long.
Yeah.
for their like quinoa salad, because not only did I not have like proper prep and production, I didn't understand assembly, like what needs to be made up beforehand, right? Like, what do I need to make on the spot? How do I actually make this really, really, really efficient, and at its scale, right? Because when people prepare things as if they're making food for their friends at a dinner,
right,
and you think that that's going to translate into a restaurant where 100 orders are coming in within 2 hours, it just doesn't translate at all. And so that's when I realized, oh, this is way too complicated. I'm doing way too much. I need to systematize things from the recipe standpoint all the way to, okay, how does this get made at scale, and then being able to project. Because I think that one of the biggest challenges that new food service businesses have, which they're going to have to a certain degree regardless, is just, how do I project how much I need? You just don't know, because you have no historical data. You walked in day one, you're blind. And so you're thinking, hey, I'm going to sell $2,000 worth of product today. So you're going to be wrong. The question is, how wrong are you? And the other element is you don't know how that $2,000 that you might have even made, which you're not, because it's going to be off, is broken down categorically, meaning how much of that is juice, how much of that is food, how much of that is smoothies, how much of that is coffee, and whatever else is on your menu. You don't know how things are broken down, so you don't know what you should have prepared for and how much, and it's all connected to that. So definitely these things get easier when you have data to be able to refer to and look back on and go, okay, well, for the last few weeks, we've been doing, this is the pattern. This is the growth pattern in these categories, right? Everything works its way backwards from your sales. You're basically, in a business like this, you're reverse engineering your potential outcome. And I find that food service entrepreneurs that do really well in this dimension are really good at that. They're really good at doing projections and saying, okay, I know that we're probably going to do this based on history, based on whatever other elements are there. Oh, there's an event. Oh, there's going to be, actually they're doing construction. I know that at my juice bar, it was crazy. There was a period of time where we had a water pipe burst under the main road on Sunset Boulevard. And I kid you not, for the next 6 months, they were doing serious construction in the middle of the road. This is like the one driveway that people came in to come to the business. This affected the sales in a pretty big way. Right. But you have to account for all of these miscellaneous things that are going to impact the outcome of your production, and then work your way backwards because your scheduling is connected to that, right? Which is, your labor, how much you need to prep, all these things, different days of the week, because, Sundays and Saturdays might have different sales than Monday through Friday. And so when you don't have data, you're new to the industry, it's really hard to know these things. And so you're going to get it wrong. The question is, how wrong do you get it? And in which directions? And so for me, that was one of the big learning curves. And then once you have that kind of figured out, you have to have some system to be able to translate what you know to the rest of your team so that they can run their production in an efficient manner. Because it's one thing to know it and go, okay, great. But then that's just one layer at the top of the entire scale, which most people don't get right or even think about. But then beyond that, you go, okay, now how does that translate into like a very practical, dimension of how much, Randy needs to juice today when he gets in? Like, how many pounds does he need to juice, and what steps in the process he needs to have in order to make that happen? So you work away from the most granular dimension of production to, okay, what is the higher level? What was the moment for you guys? Like, when did you realize, hey, what we're doing on this small scale doesn't work anymore? And how long into the business was that? And what was kind of like the first problem you solved?
Yeah, so a great question. I think for us, I would say about 6 months in, we were having, almost 50% growth. In the first year, it was rapid, right? I think like most companies, we were in packaged food, so slightly different, but it was in the short code, fresh food, short shelf life, which I think is a very key distinction in this industry. Is stuff is fluctuating all the time. So for us, the big thing is, throughout the season, you start to notice that the produce you're buying, it's not giving you the same yield, from week to week. There's all this variability. And as we started to, for us, the added complexity of we're having to actually deliver wholesale to other stores, having to figure out how much we need. It's not like if we short our stores from an order, they drop us, right? Because it's like, hey, we lost sales now. So it's one thing for us to take the hit internally. Now we're hitting our clients with lost revenue. It's unacceptable. So very quickly, we were feeling the pressure of we have to get this right. And I'm sure everybody has their crazy war stories of their, Frankenstein Excel sheet that they build. And, that's where we started to see, okay, we have this crazy Excel sheet and it kind of gets us through, right? You can kind of do it. You're spending, as you're scaling up, you're spending more and more time. At some point, we were spending several hours every morning trying to figure out how to produce that day's product. Because the problem with short shelf code product is if you overproduce, it's pretty much garbage, right? You're not going to be able to really resell that. If you do, you're taking the risk of having a customer have a bad experience. There's food safety concerns. There are all these issues that I think in other industries, if you over manufacture in other industries, you can kind of get away with it, right? It's not good. It's not good for your cash flow. It's not good to tie up inventory like that, but you can kind of get by for a while. But I think for fresh, right away you feel it. So we were feeling it very early on, and again, I started going on the hunt. Where's the software that's going to solve this? And we couldn't really find a simple enough solution. I think there are solutions out there that are big, and it's not even a price thing, but the level of data entry necessary to get it in and the speed at which you can adjust, because that's the other key thing, is being able to get new products in, being able to tweak your products. As an early stage company, you need to be able to be flexible and tweak. And I think having the nesting, they're like, in my mind, they're like Russian dolls. There's a bit of a Russian doll style process to these flavor characteristic to these recipes. It's not just 2 ingredients, but there's the juice step that has a specific yield of how much apples to make this much apple juice, how much of that apple juice then to go into my different products. So you have this hierarchy that makes it a little bit unique and a little bit more complex than I think most potentially other food service businesses. So I think that's kind of where we started to really invest in figuring out how to make a better system. And we've gone over the years, we went through many iterations, many versions. And that's kind of where I stepped in and started building some internal tooling from an early stage to try to get us through that growth period. And, eventually, up to, multi-7 figures spread across, hundreds of stores. There was quite a significant kind of growth spurt that I think was very foundational, that we had software that allowed us to kind of grow, that was tuned to our operation. It wasn't so general purpose. I think that's the other problem that I've seen is you have very general purpose tooling, and then you have slightly more niche software that's geared, say, for food service. But I think what really was missing for us that we identified was we need fresh food. Fresh food is very unique, and we need to really kind of build our operation, our tooling around that.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because the thing that a lot of people might not take into account, right? So in this industry, your 2 major costs are your labor and your food costs, right?
Right.
And when you overproduce, you don't just lose money through spoilage, which is your food cost. You lose money through labor because you're also having people produce that product that nobody bought, which is why it's so, whereas kind of the latter scenario that you mentioned, if somebody's doing some dry food product that has a 6-month shelf life, right? Because they've taken all of the, anything that was alive in there is gone, which is why I also see it makes a lot of sense that most of the food people consume or that people find is not fresh. Why?
So true.
Because it's a lot easier to transport, right? Because you don't have all these issues with like, oh, we need a refrigerated truck now, or, and it's a lot easier to store because you don't need refrigeration in the store. You don't have to have the same kind of inventory turnover because things aren't going bad. So it's hard enough to do that, but it's so much harder to deal with a fresh food product at scale. Absolutely. And so the thing that's also becomes more apparent as you run any business is that you have to be so process driven, like that the efficiency of your process is the thing that gives you extra leverage in being able to save money and make money, right? Because if you save money, now you have more money to invest in making money. These two things are interconnected. And I find that the paradox of the personality type of food service entrepreneurs, which I don't know if you observe this as well, is it's all passion and no process. So you get into food service, which is the dichotomy of just being who you are. You get into food service because you want to help people get healthy. You have a passion for this product. You want to just like express your creativity, and then everything that comes with that is actually highly scientific and systematic and almost so left brain and antithetical to the nature of the inspiration that got you to the place where you wanted to do it to begin with, right? It's sort of like you're an artist and then you realize in order to create the painting, you have to become a scientist. Those two things don't usually come together at all or meet, but that is the reality of it. It's like you kind of have to become, because even with you guys doing these, previously before developing software, having spreadsheets and on Excel, and I wasn't doing any of that. Yeah, because I wasn't Excel savvy, and I'm sure probably 80-90% of people who listen to this podcast are in a similar place. Like, well, how would you even do that in Excel? What do you mean? Because then you have to program the spreadsheets. That's an undertaking in and of itself. And even if you do it that way, it's not going to be clean or organized or like shoot out a production sheet or something for you that you can really use in a way that's clean and simple to understand and you can hand to your staff. And so, yeah, I think this is one of the dichotomies of the personality types and what you kind of find yourself up again, not just from a practical standpoint, but interpersonally. It's just a totally different way that you operate. It's sort of like, oh, I want to make juice, but I have to build a juicer. That wouldn't make, you probably wouldn't do it, right?
Right.
Because you're not an engineer and you're not in I'm not in the world of building juicers. That's not what I do. I'm here to make the product and serve it to people. But in this situation, it's kind of analogous to that. It's like, oh, I want to make juice, but now I have to do all these complicated math problems. I have to do calculus and figuring out how much juice that I need for this. It's just absolutely insane. And so what do people revert to? They revert to just guessing, right? Here's what I think I need at scale. Because at least if I have my recipe, I can multiply it by 10, I can multiply by 5. But then if I have to multiply by 7, and then also find out the interrelatedness between all the recipes, which is another component, because it's not just the singular recipe. It's like, how does this recipe connect to that recipe, connect to that recipe? It's all of the recipes that are interconnected. And so then it just becomes a mess and people are overproducing or underproducing. And, the team is just running around like chickens with their heads cut off because they don't know how to actually do this in a way that makes a lot of sense.
I think it's especially, everything you're saying, it really resonates. And I think it's especially the case with this particular kind of health and wellness. Because I imagine maybe there's some industries or some subsections of food where you get into it and it's mostly kind of financially driven. I don't really think that's the case with this, right? I look at Margot, my sister. It was a passion for her, right? So she had no concept. It's just like, this is healing food. This is amazing. Let's make this. Let's spread it to the world. Like, it's this very non-business. And I think that trickles down in a lot of ways to the value, like the margins are oftentimes much smaller than the rest of the industry because you're putting actual real food, right? It costs something. And how many times, we'd have these, our heads would be kind of butting against, we can't put why not just, we're basically paying people to eat this food. And I think the beauty of having systems in place is, you start to see it surfaces it. So you have to face the reality. And I think at some point you come to grips with the fact that, yes, we want to make a sustainable business at a minimum, and we want to really have something that allows us to thrive so that we can continue to grow it. And I think having visibility into what's actually happening is key to that. And then I think also you have more margins, so you can, when you're in that place of strength and abundance, you can give, right? You can give from that place more easily. So I think quality, the reason that I think we got into it in the first place was we want to help people. We want people to get healthier. And having that additional margin allows us to kind of execute on that goal, I think, a lot easier. And I was always amazed, all the fellow foodies and food owners, juice bar owners. I was amazed at how far they were kind of able to grow through sheer willpower, holding everything in their heads. And usually there's like one or two key people on the team that are carrying the whole thing, and they're also doing it in their heads. And the problem with that is, we tend to get into this vicious cycle of people being overburdened. Your key person is overtaxed, and that's not sustainable, right? And you know that they're overworking. You know that they're holding too much, weight, and you're scrambling because you don't have the time and the capacity to start to fix things. So I think culturally, it's amazing what happens when you start to implement things that start shifting, even very subtly, very slowly, but they start to shift that culture of, okay, we're a culture of kind of continuous improvement. And I think as soon as you start to do that and people see, a tool was introduced that actually made our lives easier, there's this hope that starts to infuse throughout the team. And when you go to introduce the next thing, because I'm sure we're going to talk about this at some point, but change management, getting people to actually adopt things is one of the hardest things I've experienced, right? But once you start building some momentum with it, it's much easier to introduce the second, the third, the fourth change, to the point where people start to get thirsty for it. They realize, they start to make the association that, oh, when there's a problem, there's actually got to be a solution, as opposed to kind of this almost learned helplessness that I think is commonplace in the industry, where we're just like, yeah, it sucks, and that's kind of how it is. And when that shifts, that's very powerful, because I think that's kind of unique. If you do find places that have that type of culture, I feel like the team tends to want to stay in a place like that. And now you're talking about lowering your turnover rate, which is massive, right? So I think all of these things are interconnected, and it's amazing how these little things start to make massive impacts.
Yeah, that's probably one of the bigger revelations that you have when you're just getting into this as well, is like how big kind of everything is at scale. Like everything's a big deal. Everything has like one employee who has one bad habit. Oh, that impacts all the employees, because then they start to observe them. And then, so I think we can probably even do a whole nother episode on culture, but it is interesting to see what the intersection is of the systems you have in place and how you, because, I often say that your employees are evaluating you as a company as much as you're evaluating them. They're not only evaluating you as far as, do they want to stay there? How much effort do they want to put in? But they are going to give you the respect that you have in a lot of ways for the business. So when you're a company and an employee comes in and you have all of your systems down, you have this process, you know what you're doing, the level of respect that employees give you is going to be so much higher, because they realize this person is thinking about everything, right? So I need to actually show up with excellence, because that is the standard that I've walked into, as opposed to you come in and you're like, yeah, this is kind of, we throw this together on a spreadsheet and we just guess, and that starts to impact their level of thinking around the level of respect that they have for the business and how they show up, whether they know it or not, right? Some people are more or less impacted by this. And so, yeah, I think it's interesting too. I also reflect on when you're an outsider in the industry, or maybe let's say you're new to the industry, and you see all these really, semi-large companies. You could say even companies that are doing, between $1 and $5 million a year. They could have multiple locations. It's often the I would say, like, maybe call it like the size or scale fallacy. People have this fallacy as well in this industry around franchises. They think because a business is franchised, they must be the perfect company. Where it's like, well, if you're franchised, you've dialed everything in. And as our business, we've been here 13 years, longer than certain franchises that have been there. We've had multiple franchise heads and franchisees call us to try to help them solve a lot of their problems, because they just don't know what they're doing. They had just chosen to franchise their business. And so the reality is that a lot of people, even at scale, are still piecemealing all of this together. They're kind of, and part of the reason is kind of what you alluded to when you first started talking, is because what might work at $100,000 in sales might not work at $1 million in sales.
Right.
And from an organizational standpoint, who's on your team, from a systems and software standpoint, because you start to scale every little aspect. You're like, oh, I need systems because these things that you don't know become bottlenecks. Like, how do we onboard people? Oh, I need an HR system to be able to just input employees, because of the sheer volume of employees that are coming in now. This is impacting the business in a very negative way. Whereas before, when I had 1 or 2 employees, I could do things manually, right? I could keep recipes in my head. I could do this. So a lot of times it's two, I think, misconceptions that are there. One is that businesses that are at a certain scale, because you and I both know companies that are of reasonable size, could be 1 to 5 million. No software, no systems. They're just sheer like hand to paper, sometimes spreadsheets at best. And they're just, this is why you see companies too. You have vendors, you're like, fax you? We don't own a fax. You can fax you. We can't fax. I can't fax you. But they haven't got it because they've been around for 10, 20 years. They're like, in order for us to change this one little thing, it means retraining our entire staff. It means actually getting software. These things seem little, but this is why it's really important from a foundational level to think. I often say when you act and think and operate your small company like a big company, that's what helps you get big. From every dimension, from a branding dimension, from a systems dimension, that's the thing that actually gives you the bandwidth to become a large company. Whereas small businesses think, oh, I can get away with this bad habit for now, and it doesn't scale. But when I get to the point where I need to do it, then, and in some ways that I would say philosophically that is accurate. There are circumstances where that does apply, but a lot of times it doesn't scale and you don't realize. And then you get to the point where you've like reached the freeway and you've only got a bicycle. And it's like, I got to get on the freeway and I don't even have the money or the capacity to go back and go buy a car, even though I want that to go past this, but I'm being forced because of the pressure and the momentum of the demand for my product and the marketplace. That's like, I'm just going to go on there and I'm going to wing it. I'm going to figure it out, hopefully. But it's really hard to go backwards and then start creating those systems that you need, because momentum keeps you moving in a way that you have bad habits, because you have to pick your head up above water to then create a whole new system, which is why having that from the very, very beginning is really, really important. Otherwise, you wouldn't see these like, I'm amazed at times where I had a friend, she had a company almost doing $2 million a year. And I was like, wait, what do you mean you don't know what your menu, like your product costing is? Like, how are you operating 2 million? And of course, she went out of business. This company was around after, for like 10 years, totally failed because they did not understand the system of like breaking down all their product pricing and then going and saying, okay, we need to adjust the price on this, or we need to change the recipe here. They just didn't have the mind to do that. So their success a lot of times, which happens less often, but some people do succeed accidentally and build companies that are bigger than you would imagine, kind of accidentally, but they don't last long term. It's hard. Eventually you have to pay the piper, or, kind of come to Jesus. You have your come to Jesus moment where you're like, okay, I need to actually atone for the fact that I have sinned in the dimension of not actually paying attention to these like very deep and clear things around the processes within my business. You're going to atone for it, because the reality is that there's probably other people out there who are doing it. And if you have competitors who are doing it, they're going to eat you alive. You don't want to be the person who doesn't have the systems in your business to make things run efficiently.
Absolutely. I think the reality is the majority of the food that's produced and sold on the globe is produced by large manufacturers, right? You're talking about, if you look at co-packers, now these are people that are in it for the money, right? So they're very particular about cost. They have no incentive other than profit in this game. So I think in a way you are competing with that style of manufacture. And it's, just to kind of recall a friend of mine, they sell one SKU to Trader Joe's. I think it's something like 20 million in revenue a year, right? Single SKU. And their understanding around that one product, because if you think like one product, they can optimize their entire operation around that. It's a very different type of mindset. I have, you're talking about people not knowing their numbers. I think I'm always amazed at the lack of inventory management and how difficult it is to implement something like that as you grow, if you don't have something in the beginning. And I think the problem is it's a cultural issue. As you scale and you get more staff, your difficulty, the barrier culturally to get that implemented, it goes exponential. And I think that my conversations with my friend, and he has I think 12 locations. He's doing probably in excess of 15 or 20 million a year. And I spoke with him, years ago, where I think when they were at 10 million, they didn't have a single system for inventory, and they were losing about 20 or 30% in potential revenue due to stockouts, right? It's like, we can't produce this item because we don't have X ingredient, because we just don't have inventory. So we don't know what we have and what we don't have. It was that chaotic. I was like, my mind was blown when I heard, because like you said, this fallacy of scale, you think, I walk in, he has 150 employees, like, my God, he has everything together. And you see that, no, it's actually really simple. When he has such a good product and a good business model, right, that he's able to kind of scale on that. And he's the first one to admit, he's like, this is such a problem for us that we don't have this. And it's now taking them years to implement something. Because like you said, you change one thing, it has major impact. Just imagine trying to implement, at this point, they need a full-blown ERP system. Trying to implement that is major. And you look at these large companies, you're talking major, Fortune 100 companies, they fail to implement ERP systems, right? They're these, the list of the top 10 major ERP failures in the magnitude of billions of dollars lost, right, over years of time. It's just like, it's garbage. It didn't work. And a lot of it has to do with, it's really hard to get people to change overnight, to flip on a system, and now suddenly we're going to be doing it this other way. That's why I think that early kind of stages where you can layer something in bit by bit, and that's really been our philosophy, I think, is how do you get the smallest usable bit of functionality implemented into your business, instead of trying to do this big bang, I'm going to come in and make this amazing system. I think the problem with that is it's well-intentioned, but the problem is the change management, right? If you're one person, you can be disciplined and say, like, I'm going to totally do this other system, but you're not alone, right? And getting even a second person to adopt it is a major lift. So I think doing this incremental, long, it's a marathon, right? And I think approaching it like a marathon, you are careful how you go into it. You layer things in. You don't run too quickly. You pace yourself. So I think that approach to technology is really key in this process to be successful.
It reminds me of language, right? Like when you're learning a new language, and you and I are fascinated by language. It's like you learn a word or you learn a sentence and you go use it. But if you were to try to digest a whole language, and that's what a lot of ways these softwares are, it's like you're asking someone, because you have all these processes in your brain of how you've already done things. And then you're asking someone to do things completely differently. So then now it's a reorientation of, and a lot of times too, the way that you're doing things differently, it also is kind of like apples and oranges. They both produce juice, but the one might be very physical. Like someone just enjoys the experience of like writing things down. It's like, I like to write things down, or I'm very visual. And so I take pictures of things. And then now you're asking me to type things into a computer. It's not how I'm oriented. And so it's actually personality types where, there is the person who would prefer to like lift up the rocks by themselves and walk them over to the, whatever it is, the driveway, than to actually get into a forklift. And then, because even though you're having the same outcome and one is more efficient, the experience of operating a forklift is totally different. And you have to know kind of how to drive. So then I got to go, because we even had to let go of an employee in our company recently because they couldn't actually make that shift over to the software. They were so used to doing things a certain way, and that they were like, oh, I'm just not computer savvy. I don't know how to do this. And it's like, well, you're becoming the bottleneck, and we can't have that. Like, we have to be able to do this because there are so many downstream effects in the company. There's so many people that are going to be impacted by the one task that you're doing, that we can't afford to just compromise and say, well, we're going to do the way that you want to do it because it's easy for you. This is bigger than you. And so, but when you have resistance from an entire company and everybody needs to do this all at once, that's where things break down. It's like, yes, you're asking everybody to do too many things all at the same time, which is why it's just easier overall to have new people get new, as the old adage goes, it's easier to teach a a new dog new tricks, or it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks.
Right.
So that's the same thing. Do we want to talk a little bit more kind of in practical terms around what we've been creating and where our attention has been as we've kind of looked at this, in some ways, unique problem to juicing world and just fresh food overall, like, where we came to and even how we came to it. You feel, ready to dive into all that?
Absolutely. Let's do it. What's your take on it?
So it's actually quite kind of interesting because a number of years back, I had a client. How did you end up? I don't even remember what the dynamic was. How did you end up talking to Dallas? Because we were at LA Press. There was a client of ours we were working with. The GM there came to us and was like, "Hey guys, I'm spending hours a day just doing the math on my production. It's like, this is a really, really big pain point." And I think you and I had been having conversations about software. Was that?
Yeah, we had been talking about the system that we were using internally. And you were kind of becoming aware of that whole tooling, and you started to see the connection between, because again, even though we weren't doing specifically juice, is very much the same type of problem because of, again, the freshness of it.
Yeah, I remember now. Yeah, and then I remember hearing this and going, "Oh yeah, this is a problem." This is kind of, I think, the unique thing about having issues in your business. We were talking about this the other day. Is that there's so many things that we take as a given that we don't even think to problem solve them. We're like, this is just the way that it goes, and this is painful, and it's just the necessary pain of existence. It's just what happens when you run this business. And Aram and I had been having so many conversations about different software ideas, projects. I was observing things that he had done in his business, and I was kind of trying to reflect to you like, hey, this is a big deal, and a lot of people are suffering with this problem, not just you guys. And the fact that you found solutions to that internally, like the tools you've built for your business, are working really great for you, but this would actually work really great for a lot of people. And so I remember, speaking to the general manager at this previous client's business, and he was just saying how much time he's been spending with doing the math on the productions to get all the measurements and everything to be dialed in. And I was like, yeah, that's actually true. It's the same thing in my business. We're having to do these productions every day, and we have to figure out how much we need. And based on what's on the shelf and the inventory there, because we don't want to overproduce, every day it's different, right? We want to get somewhere within a range based on our projections. And then we got to do the math on how much of everything we need also for our ordering, because our orders got to come in, at a certain time. There's just so many things that are interconnected to this. And it's like, we just do it, and it's painful, and we spend time on it, and that's it. And then, Aram and I came together and realized, well, one, he had in a large part solved this problem already, but for his business. And now this actually will apply to people making juice. So we built this software called UPressed for these clients. They loved it. They've been using it ever since. This was how many years ago? 5 years ago?
5 years, yeah.
Yeah, so it's been 5 years, and Aram and I have kind of been sitting on this this idea of going back and forth if it's something we really want to pursue, even though we know it's a problem that we can solve for people. But I think in the direction of time of seeing how adamant this client was, and I think for you too, probably having the experience where other people came and you were like, hey, you know what? Like, just do it this way. And they were like, no, we have to use software.
Right.
Like they were like fighting you tooth and nail to be like, you need to keep us on this thing because of how important it is for everything we're doing. I think it then revealed more to Aram about like just how pressing it is for people. And so we decided, you know what, let's actually focus on helping people with their production, helping them make it more efficient and do it at scale, and put more of our attention on getting more people on board to solve this really significant issue, which is how do you efficiently and accurately put together production lists based on the uniqueness of not only your menu, but the dynamic nature of the daily changes that are happening in your business, and do it in a way that's quick enough, right? So a process that Dallas told us, he was the GM at the time, that he was spending at least an hour to 2 hours every day just doing the math on this thing. And then when we created the software for them, he was able to output everything in literally seconds, like 15 seconds, just put in what he wants, and then he gets the full production list. Because at the end of the day, it is all math. And when you understand how to mix and match all those things and you have clear objective of output, now you can get it. And not only can you get the right numbers, but the question is, how do you visually format it in a way that makes sense to your team? Because Excel spreadsheets are clunky, and that's not what someone wants to really be looking at when they're looking at a production. You can't change sizes, you can't change format, you can't prioritize. It's just a mess. And so we've created a software now that allows people to be able to just simply put in the output of what they're looking to produce for their daily production, and everything that you need is just spit out for you.
That's it. It's amazing how this seemingly simple problem is actually quite complex. I think it's inherently a complicated problem when you have multi-level recipes, and in this case you do. You have to understand specifically how this one ingredient impacts all the way through your production pipeline, all the way from ordering to finished bottle. And I think to get it right is, again, back to the issue of I think Dallas is an interesting case because he was analytical, right? He understood the impact of not getting it right and overproducing or underproducing. He understood the impact of that. And I think that if you realize like that is really key to your profitability as a company, then the question is, okay, how do I solve this? So it has to be done. The question is, how do you best do it? And I think it's a very narrow entryway into the broader scope of kind of what has to happen to run an operation efficiently. But it is a key piece that has to happen every day. And I think in this simple scenario, all you want is, I want to be able to put in, I have 10 products on my menu. I want to put in X number per day. Like you said, I think a key thing is it's fluctuating throughout the week, not only throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the season. So the fact that it has to be dynamic is another key indicator. If you are close to the kind of metal in terms of this is my projected sales, and you're able to adjust, because I think what most people are doing, they're falling into the habit of just, I'm going to do my pars. What did I do last Wednesday? I'm going to do that again today. And I think the problem is that compounds over time. And if you really come to grips with what that is doing to your bottom line when you are approaching it like that, it's massive. And you just compound that year after year, and you see that, God, that might be the difference between just that little tweak in numbers might be the difference between, $500,000, $1 million over the course of a business over a decade. When you start thinking about it in terms of those numbers, you realize, oh, this is actually a costly problem I need to address. So I think being able to put in, here are the numbers I need, give me my sheets, I hand that to my people. That extra 1 hour, 2 hours of savings every day, not only time savings, but actually being correct with your operation it has a massive impact on the business.
Mm-hmm. Because the implications, just to expand on that a little bit, the implications of being inaccurate are, if you underproduce and you don't have product on the shelf, people aren't buying from you. So it's lost sales, it's lost revenue, right? And then if you overproduce, now you have spoilage, lost labor, lost product costs and expense there. And so it is such a fundamental part of being able to make money, and that it's sad that there hasn't really been a significant solution outside of people just guessing or trying to put together, clunky spreadsheets that oftentimes might not be accurate. And there's definitely another element to people needing to have insight into their products, right? You have to do your inventory and like what's there right now versus what do we need, and understand that right. Cars are going to fluctuate. So there's some aspect of human intelligence that's necessary. But then everything downstream of like, what does that mean in terms of how much I need to order, and what does that mean in terms of how much we need to produce for this specific ingredient connected to these 5 different products and so forth, just gets easier. You don't have to think about it.
Right. And that's been our conversations, right? That's where we want to go with it. It's right now we're in, kind of private beta. We're getting some key people in slowly as the system ramps up. But I think getting the this is a critical entry point into all of these other aspects. And as we roll out, our long feature list, our roadmap of all of these issues, right? Inventory management is a huge one. How do we actually approach this in a way that isn't broken, I think, like a lot of the systems, right? There's just just inherent complexity again in getting the numbers, obviously costing, projections, right? So we're in a very interesting time where these technologies that have been kind of developed over the decades are actually coming to a point of real commercial value. And I think that there's a hype cycle right now. Obviously, AI is all the rage, but I think once this hype cycle finds its equilibrium and we start to see like, okay, what are the real useful applications? I think that that's kind of the key for us is how do we incorporate in this very physical industry, right? We're talking about things we eat. We can't get more intimate than what people put in their mouths. And I think kind of getting into a place where we can start to help facilitate and help those types of businesses really compete, because I think with all this change, there's a ton of uncertainty as to where all of this fits. I think it's extremely important to be positioned so that your team, your operation, your company is philosophically kind of in line with walking this path. And I think that this is why it's important to get your foot in the door at this point. And that's, I think, why we've kind of come to this conclusion of we need to start getting people in at the ground level, before the whole system is I think too far gone.
Mm-hmm. I often think about, like what has allowed humanity, what distinguishes human beings from a lot of other creatures and mammals even. It's the fact that we're very good at making tools, right? It's like our capacity to create and make a tool has given us leverage over the physical environment. From just a base level, that's actually it. And the communities, cultures who have the best tools, even you think about war and the Europeans coming and having muskets and having guns versus the Native Americans having bows and arrows, that was the competitive advantage that allowed to kind of colonize a great portion of the world, right? It's like when you're in a competitive environment, it is actually the tools that you have as a company that allow you to compete at a higher level and beat people who are competing with you. And all software is just another tool. It's just a computing tool. And I was even thinking about systems, like everything in our life in a lot of ways I was even thinking like the bath mat that goes on the ground when I get out of the shower is a system. It's not a very complex system, but it's something that I thought about ahead of time. And then I have to have a system around that going into the laundry and then like coming out and drying and then but everything in our life to a degree is kind of a system, and you either have very efficient systems. I was even noticing like how I floss my teeth. I have a system for that, like where I start on the bottom and then I go left to right and then I go up to, and I like everything that we do to a certain degree, we eventually, if we do it enough times, we systematize. But the problem is, and the issue is that we don't tend to have systems for these things. And the more you scale that out over a lifetime, if you have an inefficient system for doing something, you just have so much waste. But the issue also is that you don't have measurable waste. So a lot of these things go unnoticed because you have no comparable metric. You're just like, yeah, I have a very inefficient system for flossing my teeth, but I don't know what the impact of that is because I have no comparison. I haven't talked to people. I just don't know. But that could lead to down the line cavities, needing for dentures, root canals, not being able to chew your food appropriately. So now your digestion is impacted. Your digestion is impacted. You're not digesting your food correctly. Now you've developed some autoimmune disease, or now you're not getting nutrients. Then your lifespan. You would never think something as small, but you don't see the downstream impact of those things because we're just like, it's flossing, right?
Right.
And I think that's the very interesting thing when you start to measure things in your business, which is one of the other blind spots. I often say you can't manage what you can't measure and you can't see, right? Or that you don't understand. All those things are issues. And the more we can do that, and the more we are, I think humanity, as we are becoming more data driven, is doing that. You've got apps that are, on your phone seeing how much you walk. And then it's like, hey, people who walk more live longer, or you like whatever else it is. And now we can quantify these things that at one point we were just blind to. But when you're starting a business, for that much more of a reason, because your life is dependent on it, your employee's livelihood is dependent on it. Everything is dependent on how detailed you are in making these small decisions. I remember once when we made a shift in our menu at the juice bar, because I started to dive back into the menu costing, which the other issue with people menu costing is they do it once, if they do it at all, once every 6 months, maybe once every year, maybe once a quarter.
Maybe just once. Right.
Maybe just once, right? But it's impacting you every day. So I go back and I do my menu costing again. I'm like, oh my God, the price of cucumbers have just gone through the roof. We have this in like so many of our drinks. And then I changed from cucumber to celery, which, there's the emotional component and being like, oh my God, people are attached to this ingredient. People don't care. They don't care as much as you care. You think that they care more than you care. Anyway, so I swap it out. I go from cucumber to celery, and then we make an extra $10,000 on our bottom line that month in net profit because of how significant this ingredient was and how much it was costing us. But people aren't looking at these things. You don't see it and you're blind to it. So it's like a silent killer. It's like this thing is literally killing your business, and you don't think about that too. Like, if I had done that a year before, that's $120,000 extra that I would have had that I just didn't know. You're just blind to. So this is all the stuff that people are not seeing. There's so many things like this. And part of our objective is to, in twofold, not only give you more information, right? Give you the data, eventually when we start doing things like menu costing and everything else, but give you a system to manage it easily, right? Because the reason that people don't do these things like the menu cost is because it's not easy. It's difficult. It's hard. It's arduous, right? It takes a different kind of thinking. Right. So therefore, they avoid it. But if we can make these things a lot easier, then you reduce the friction, and then now more people can manage their businesses with accuracy and with ease.
100%. I think as you're saying all this, I'm getting flashbacks to, the times when I think we've all been there. We know there's so many broken things, and it's a sense of overwhelm, right? You're burned out, you're tired, you have a million things that you're trying to deal with. And sometimes I would even say that hearing that, oh, there's a better way, part of me is like, oh, just leave me alone. Like, I don't want to hear anything right now. I know there's a better way. That's not helping me. That's making me feel worse because I'm now feeling like a failure, that I'm not doing better in my business, right? So I think that's why I love I love the baby steps. I love these small little changes that are instant wins. How do we get people instant small wins so that we can slowly build up momentum and this resilience? And it's muscle building, right? It's like, how do we start to grow that muscle in the company? And pretty soon you're able to lift massive amounts, right? Big changes suddenly can be incorporated into your business. And I think that's a beautiful thing when that happens, because I've seen it. I've seen in the beginning, pulling teeth, trying to get people to do something, and I fail and I fail and I fail. And then I finally am able to get some little thing in, and then pretty soon I can see there's a shift in their mood. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, what's coming next, right? What's the next change that's going to make our lives better? Because I think that's the big thing, is once people start to see like, oh, wow, that actually felt good after that workout, I want to do that again, right? I'm now more open. I'm less resistant to it. So I think it's a beautiful place to be, and there's just so much opportunity right now to take advantage of. I think it's a very unique time in history that we're in, and I tend to be optimistic about technology. I'm less dystopian. I know that there's some very dystopian stuff out there, but I think that it's up to us to nudge it in a very positive way And at the end of the day, in this particular industry, right? How do we get people healthier? How do we get people thinking in a more positive way? And I feel like the more we can get businesses to be profitable and thrive, the more of that type of business is going to flourish, right? And that's really, I think, the ultimate service here is how do we all collectively become successful in this? So,
yeah, I think I always say that people, yeah, it was a good one. People owe it to themselves and their communities to run their businesses well, because once again, the downstream impacts of that, of you having a very successful business, means more people are going to get healthy, right? And then the opposite is, if your business isn't there and people don't have access, they might, we've had clients who their motivation for starting a juice bar was someone in their family had cancer and they didn't have the time or energy to juice for them every day.
That's right.
And that is like heartbreaking for them. And they think there's nothing in our community that we can go to and get juice or healthy products for our family member.
It's mostly food deserts. Yeah.
Exactly. So right now we are in the phase of, which depending on when you're listening to this and how long this podcast has been out and this video has been out, we might be further along, but it's auto.ai. That's OUGHTO.ai. If you go to that website, you'll be able to either sign up for our waiting list if you're early to the party, or you might see that we already have a lot of other features and things up and running, and you can, reach out to us there and we can see how we can get you on board and start allowing you to run your business more efficiently. But we're excited and we're grateful, and looking forward to seeing how we can impact this industry in a positive way and just get people to find more ease so they can focus on running their business the way that they want to run it and not spend all their day trying to put together clunky spreadsheets.
Beautiful. Andrew, thank you.
All right, guys. Yeah, thank you. Always good. Yeah, until next time. All right, you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Hope you guys have been enjoying the video content. If you're inspired to learn even more about how to start your juice business from scratch, for you, we have a free ebook. It's called The 15 Steps to Starting Your Juice Business. And this is going to go through a high-level overview, through a step-by-step process on how you get your business off the ground. Everything from, branding, menu development, finding the right location, and more. This is going to be a clear roadmap so you know how to go from where you are all the way to opening your store. If you want to go even deeper, we've also created an online course. It's called the Juice Bar Master Blueprint. This is going to go into great depth on everything from how do you put together and think about recipe development? How do you cost out your menu and what's the math around it? What equipment do you need? How do you design your store? How do you find the right location? And so much more. I know you're going to find a lot of value out of both of these. There's links in the description below. So I hope to see you guys at the next video, and enjoy.